in this lesson, we want to begin to turn our attention toward the Donatist controversy. And in order to understand the Donatist controversy, which is probably the most important political, ecclesiastical, social event that happens in the late African church, we need to talk about the origins. So how does this come about? What brings about the Donatist controversy? And then in the next two lessons, we're going to look at the particulars of the controversy in more detail. So just to remind ourselves, with Cyprian, let me adjust this here. With Cyprian, he dealt with a question about the lapsed. How are the lapsed to be welcomed back, if at all? And we saw that some people thought they could come back immediately. Some people thought they needed, in Cyprian in particular, they could be restored only at death, just before death. And some people said never. And the image that we used to talk about this debate or this idea was, what is the church? Is the church a clean room or is the church a hospital? And with the rebaptism controversy, we shifted the image and said, well, if the church is like a hospital, does your doctor have to be well in order to help you? And frame the question this way: if the bishop is impure, then everything that bishop does is impure. This seems to be the position of many in the African church. And this is now going to come back with the Donatist controversy. So the Donatist controversy is prompted by the Great Persecution. And I have the dates here, 303 to 313. These dates are approximate as far as the starting date of 303 is quite certain. Where you actually put the end of the persecution depends on where you are. It ends at different times in different places. But let's talk about how the Great Persecution comes about, why the Great Persecution comes about, and how this sets up the controversy for the African church. So we've talked about the middle of the 3rd century and the return to a lot of traditional Roman values. Well, by the late 3rd century, we have lots of evidence from the African church and other places that the Christians are expanding. They're expanding in number. And they're expanding in number in the cities. So not just in the countryside. This is not just a slave religion for the countryside, but in the cities, the Christian presence is more obvious. And even at this period, it seems that there are specific buildings in cities that are churches, that were identified as churches, and people knew they were churches, not just a house that is perhaps converted to a church internally and privately and quietly. And these are buildings that are actually used as churches. So with this increased Christian presence, in the year 285, Diocletian becomes the emperor of the empire. Diocletian was, on the positive side, he was a brilliant administrator. He was very good at making a plan and figuring out how to get things done. Diocletian is the emperor, that, as we've mentioned before, who considers that he as one emperor can't actually administer the whole empire, so he divides it into 4 parts. So he thinks in a very administrative way, but he's also traditional. He's a traditional Roman emperor. So, like Decius, he wants to go back to the old ways. He wants to bring back that old-time religion, that old-time Roman religion. He wants to restore the glory of old Rome by restoring the old ways. If we go back to the old ways of Rome, the old success of Rome will come back. But he has new techniques to accomplish his goals, in part because he's just a better administrator than Decius was, or than Valerian was. He has better strategies to try to bring about his goal. So he wants to bring back traditional religion, back to the old ways. And of course, traditional Roman religion does not include Christianity. The Christians are present in many of the cities, but what they represent is something new, a departure from the old traditional Roman ways, and they're perceived as a threat. Diocletian wants to bring back the traditional religion. And an author around that time who wrote a panegyric, kind of a poem, an honorary poem about Diocletian, says this. He says, "You," as Diocletian, "you have heaped the gods with altars and statues, temples and offerings, which you dedicated with your own name and your own image, whose sanctity is increased by the example you set of veneration for the gods. Surely men will now understand what power resides in the gods, when you worship them so fervently. So you, Diocletian, as the emperor, you're setting the standard. You're showing everyone else this is the proper way to worship the gods. You're actually building buildings and temples and making offerings, and so everyone else is going to follow you. And isn't that a great thing? If everyone follows you, Diocletian, and worshiping the old gods, the old glory of Rome is going to come back." This idea comes back again. So there are groups in the empire that don't want that old-time Roman religion, and these religious minorities are persecuted by Diocletian. Now this includes Christians, but it's not only Christians. There are other smaller minority religious groups. For example, the cult of Mithras, which was very popular in the Roman world. It's also kind of mystery cult, and there's a baptism by blood that happens in a kind of secret chamber, a secret temple. They were also suppressed or persecuted by Diocletian. So anyone who wasn't doing traditional Roman religion was persecuted or could be persecuted by Diocletian. So let's think about the Great Persecution and what actually starts the persecution and where it starts. Diocletian has divided the empire into 4 parts. You've seen this before on the map, the 4 parts. He rules the easternmost part of the empire, and the reason he does is he considers the greatest military threat to be the Parthians in the east. So Diocletian's in charge of the easternmost part of the empire. And he has his capital in the city of Nicomedia. And Nicomedia is very close to where Constantinople is founded. It's the same little section of the world, same little corner of the world. So if you know where Constantinople is, you have a good idea where Nicomedia is, but let's look at it on a map to make sure we have in mind where this is. So here's this map that we've seen before with the 4 divisions of the empire. And this, maybe it's difficult to see the difference between these 2 shades here, but this easternmost area, this darker purple color over here, is the realm of Diocletian. He's responsible for this part because he's facing the Parthians to the east. His capital is here in Nicomedia. Let me blow this up a little bit. Here's the capital, Nicomedia. Right on the water. Here's Chalcedon, which obviously becomes important for the church later. And then the site of what is called here Byzantium is the place where Constantinople is refounded. So his capital is here in Nicomedia. Well, we know from sources that Nicomedia has a lot of Christians in it. A sizable number of Christians. Maybe not a majority. We're not talking about a majority Christians, but enough Christians that people know about them. They're not a small, little, unknown minority. And Christians are not just in the city. They're in the palace. They're in Diocletian's palace. And one of these Christians is Lactantius. We talked about him in a previous lecture. Lactantius, who was brought to Nicomedia by Diocletian to teach rhetoric, Latin language. And then when he's in Nicomedia, he converts to Christianity. And it's during this great persecution that Lactantius actually has to flee Nicomedia to the west. So even in Diocletian's own house, he has people working for him who are Christians. And if you're familiar with earlier Christian history, you might know that there are references in the New Testament to the household of Caesar. Greetings to those who were in the household of Caesar. And in many of the martyrdom accounts of Paul, one of the first scenes is that Paul raises from the dead the imperial cupbearer of the Emperor Nero. The cupbearer comes in to hear Paul preach. He falls out of a window and dies, and Paul raises him from the dead. So this idea of Christians in the imperial household is not a new thing, but it's happening here in Nicomedia. And by some accounts, Diocletian can actually see the church from his balcony. So if you're Diocletian and you're trying to get rid of these new dangerous religions, and on a warm summer evening, you step out onto the balcony of your palace to have a nice glass of red wine from the island of Samos and think about imperial things, there's the church, reminding you of these revolutionaries, these dangerous people who could be undermining traditional Roman values and potentially undercutting the empire itself. So Diocletian takes action. He passes a new policy that Christians are eliminated from the army. This is actually quite interesting because you may recall from an earlier lecture that one of the categories of person, according to Hippolytus of Rome, who could not be baptized was a soldier. Soldiers could not be baptized. People in the military could not be baptized because in the military you had to take an oath of allegiance to the emperor. And so Hippolytus tells us if they take the oath of allegiance to the emperor, they can't be loyal to God. But apparently in Diocletian's time there are Christians in the army, and so obviously Diocletian thinks they can't be loyal to me. They're not loyal to me as the only king, as potentially God, or as a god. So he tries to eliminate them from the army. And there are martyrdom accounts from around this time, or that talk about things happening around this time, or that claim to talk about things happening from around this time, that involve people in the army who are martyred when Diocletian finds out that they're Christians. So the first thing he wants an army that is totally loyal to him. Now in 302, Galerius, now Galerius is the emperor of that purple section right next to Diocletian. Galerius has his capital in Thessaloniki, or Thessalonica, or Salonika. It's called different things in English. Galerius urges Diocletian to target Christians specifically. When we talked about Lactantius, we mentioned some of the, you could say the, I guess not the heroes, the anti-heroes, the great villains in his work, Nero and Valerian and Decius and Galerius. Galerius in the sources is one of the most notorious persecutors of Christians. So in 302, Galerius says to Diocletian, you really need to target these Christians. February 23rd, 303. Seldom can we give very precise dates to very important historical events, but here's a case where we can. February 23rd, 303, Diocletian destroys the church in Nicomedia. The church that he can see from his palace, he has destroyed. And this really launches the persecution, the aggressive, assertive, intentional persecution of Christians. So now really for the second time we have what is intended to be an empire-wide persecution of Christians. But Diocletian doesn't think, let's just kill all the Christians. That's not reasonable. He knows there are lots and lots and lots of Christians. He has a strategy. He thinks like an administrator thinks. His strategy is this: eliminate the Christian leaders. Eliminate the Christian leaders. And, or their books. Now this is really interesting. We might be able logically to figure out why Diocletian would want to get rid of the Christian leaders. If you get rid of the leaders, then the people don't have someone they can follow. But books, this tells us that Diocletian knows how important books are to Christians. And there's a lot of scholarship and a lot of evidence showing how books, physical objects of books, are important in early Christianity in ways that are, I guess, even more exaggerated than the rest of culture. The form of a book that we have, and I'll pick up one here, this is the Complete Dead Sea Scrolls. this form of a book, this is technically a codex. This form is called a codex, as opposed to, say, a papyrus roll. The codex as a form is developed in the period of early Christianity, and there's lots of scholarship to suggest that Christians are the ones who really begin using this form first, favoring the codex form over, for example, a papyrus roll. So it's very possible that, and we saw in the Acts of the Cilician Martyrs, they're carrying books, codices of the Apostle Paul with them when they come before the magistrate in Carthage. So Diocletian knows getting rid of their leaders is one strategy, but we also have to get rid of their books. These are people who care about these sacred books. So bishops are given a choice. Give up your books or give up your life. Your books or your life. Diocletian is thinking about getting the maximum impact from the least amount of effort. How can I maximize my effort here to persecute and control and eliminate these Christians? And as we think about the strategy, it reminds me of a statement that's in the Old Testament that Jesus actually repeats in the Gospels: strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. This is what Diocletian is trying to do. He's trying to strike the shepherds. He's trying to eliminate the Christian leaders, the bishops and the priests, the clergy. Get rid of them and the people will be dispersed. So Diocletian assumes, let's just think about this for a second. Diocletian is an emperor. In his world, he says it, and everyone underneath of him does it. So in Diocletian's world, if the leader says it, everyone does it. If people have no leader, they'll stop doing anything. He assumes that if the bishops stop telling Christians what to do, the Christians will go away. Now, historically, if we could step into that time, we'd say to Diocletian, you don't understand how this works. But this is his idea. If he wants to get rid of a rival politically, he kills the rival and all the rival's followers will just scatter. He assumes if I get rid of the bishops, I will do away with Christianity. This is his strategy. This sets up the Great Persecution, where bishops are given a choice. And the choice that those bishops make is specifically what's going to launch the Donatist controversy. How do different bishops respond? And then how do other Christians respond to those bishops in the aftermath of the persecution? And so questions about this background, these origins leading us up to the Donatist controversy, or about the Great Persecution, how it came about, or what its meaning in terms of bishops and the books in particular. Because the books are really important. We think, oh yeah, books. No, the books themselves, in many ways, are at the center of the Donatist controversy. The objects themselves are going to be crucial. If you love books, you should know early Christians loved their books too. And we'll see how much they love those books.